Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is Ari, and today we're going to have some more stories about our toxic life. But before we start, it would be so much appreciated if you would subscribe to my channel, like the video, if you enjoy it, and maybe leave a comment down below. These simple clicks would mean a lot to the future of this channel and really reward the effort that I put in every day. And now without further ado, let's go. Today's first story. In this story, a couple's dream of starting a family is shattered when the husband discovers he's infertile due to past medical treatment. They try fertility treatments, but after a year with no success, the wife cheats with a plumber, who turns out to be the father of her child. Devastated, the husband divorces her, reports the plumber for child support evasion, and focuses on rebuilding his life alone. Now let's get into the story. My wife and I recently celebrated our 5-year wedding anniversary. She and I have been together since our senior year of college. I had actually never met her until we were in the same thesis class. We sat near each other, and I thought she was cute, so one day I thought she was cute. I struck up a conversation and asked her out. Our relationship quickly evolved, and we both knew that we had something that not a lot of people found. We ended up graduating and moving in together within a year. One thing that both of us really wanted out of life was a big family. We had talked a lot about wanting to have at least 3 children, probably more. The first step for us getting started with that was to get ahead financially so we can provide for them. We got married and worked our butts off to be able to put a significant amount of money into savings to start a family. We put a down payment on a house, bought the furniture that we needed, and we started trying for a family. Everything in our life was going exactly how we wanted it to. We were thrilled to be happily starting such an incredible journey together. We had been trying for a baby for about 6 months, and we had no luck. At the time, we weren't in a huge rush for it, so we were trying not to stress out and just enjoy the time we spent trying. After a year of trying with no success, we decided that we needed to see a fertility specialist to figure out what the issue was and how to move on from it. When I went into my physical, I was quickly told by the doctor that it was likely my fault that we couldn't get pregnant. When I was a teenager, I had a brain tumor. My family did everything in their power to help me, and part of that included radiation therapy. At the time, I don't think my parents or myself were very concerned with my reproductive health. We very much wanted to make sure the tumor was gone, so we did what we had to. Now, as an adult, I'm learning that I will never be able to father my children because of it. When I left my physical, I had to break that news to my wife, and she took it very hard. We both wanted a family more than anything, and I wasn't going to be able to give that to her. Though, we still had options, and I was trying to excite her about those. After I told her about that, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was mad at me. I didn't want to believe that was the case, because it was just as heartbreaking for me as it was for her to find out. I could tell that she viewed me differently than she did before. I did everything in my power to try and bring things back to normal between us. I loved her more than anything in the world, and I didn't want to lose her over this. We had options, and we could work through them to still be happy. Not long before we started trying for a baby, we bought our own house. It was a bit of a fixer-upper, so we were working on it while living in it. There were only a few things that really needed to be taken care of. One of the biggest issues with the house was how the plumbing was very iffy. I could do some things like repair drywall and install cabinets, but we needed to hire a certified plumber to look at the house. My wife took care of that while I focused on other aspects of renovating the house. She hired the plumber and dealt with him most of the time. She told me one evening that the plumber was going to be coming over the next day. She had already met with him several times before, but I hadn't met him yet. I had already planned to take the day off work because I was expecting a large delivery that I needed to bring in. When I met him, it was difficult not to feel a little jealous. He was a good-looking guy. On top of that, he seemed to be a little chummy with my wife. I started talking to him about the work he'd been doing, and I quickly brushed off my insecurities and told myself that it was just professional between them. Things started to get back to normal between my wife and me. We were spending more time together, and we had even started being intimate again. It was much less frequent than it was when we were actively trying to have a child, but I was still happy to be happy in general. One night, She and I were just sitting on the couch and watching a couple of movies when she started off into the bathroom and threw up. Neither of us thought it was possible for her to be pregnant, so we assumed she had food poisoning. But it kept happening. She went to the doctor, and they were able to confirm that she was pregnant. I didn't understand how it happened. I have been told that I wasn't able to have children, yet my wife was pregnant. It was made for me to think this, but I thought it was a miracle. My wife wasn't as happy as I thought she would be. I assumed she would be over the moon when she got the news, but she seemed almost distressed by it. She was withdrawing from me again, and I could tell that there was something seriously wrong with her. I was worried that she wasn't feeling all right because of the pregnancy, and I was asking her all the time if there was anything I could do. She started to make very secretive phone calls and hide her phone from me when she wasn't using it. I started to think that something serious was going on. I didn't want to look into it because I was afraid I was going to get hurt, but I knew that I had to. I was able to get a quick look at her phone while she had taken a nap one afternoon, and I found information that completely shattered my heart. Of course, it was the plumber. All the time that he had been home with her, while I was at work, they were sleeping together. It had been happening since my wife found out that I couldn't father a child. In one of the messages, just hours after we found out that she was pregnant, she messaged him and told him that she was pretty sure it was his. I felt like the world had completely fallen out from under my feet. I thought having a child would be impossible for me, and I was so happy I thought it was happening. I was just a fool to believe that it was mine. The worst part about it was that the plumber didn't really want to be a part of anything. He suggested just telling me that it was mine. My wife agreed that would be the best option. I couldn't deal with my wife after learning about that. If she was going to have another man's baby and then pretend like it was mine, she wasn't the woman that I knew. I was going to divorce her, but I didn't know what to do because she was pregnant. It felt wrong to leave her while she was carrying a child, and I didn't want to leave her a single mother. My wife caught me while I was looking through her phone. She bolted up and grabbed it from my hands, and I just stared at her. She knew right away by the look in my eyes what I had found. She tried to explain herself by saying that she was in a very vulnerable state, and he was there. She thought less of me for a while because I couldn't give her a child. I told her that no matter what we were over, there was still a very slim chance the child was mine. So I wanted to have a DNA test done. If it was mine, we would deal with joint custody and figure that out. If it wasn't mine, I was out of her life completely. She reached out to the plumber and told him about it, and he agreed to give us the mouth swab that we needed to perform the test. When my wife was 8 weeks pregnant, we went in to have it done officially. The results came back that the plumber was the father. She told him, and he was less than ecstatic. It felt truly awful to leave her, but I didn't really have a choice. It wasn't my child, and I couldn't stand being around my wife after she said what she did. So I divorced her, and because of her affair, didn't have to get her anything. After the baby was born, I tried to stay out of my wife's life. She had moved back in with her parents so they could help her with childcare while she worked. Apparently, the plumber had decided he didn't want anything to do with either of them and chose not to pay child support like he was supposed to. I didn't want anything to do with my wife when I heard about that. I was frustrated. I reported him to the authorities for failure to pay child support, and he was forced to pay it with back pay or face jail time. I have a lot of things to deal with personally now. It's hard for me to trust people enough to want to get involved with another woman. On top of that, I have to worry about never being able to start my own family. I think the best thing for me at the moment is just to take some time to be single and figure out what it is that I want out of life. Today's second story. In this story, after meeting his wife in a bar and building a life together, a man's world collapses when he discovers her affair with her boss. Suspicious behaviors and a private investigator confirm his fears. Seeking revenge, he exposes the affair to her workplace, leading to both their firings and ultimately a divorce. Though regretful of the public fallout, he seeks healing from the cheating. Now let's get into the story. My wife and I met 8 years ago in a bar. She was attractive and single, and so was I. We hit it off, and after that, we pursued a relationship together. She gave me some of the best years of my life. I started a family with her, and I really thought that we were going to grow together. Unfortunately, I found out that she was having an affair with her boss, and because of that we divorced. It was one of the most difficult things I've ever had to experience, and I just want to find a way to move on from it. But here's the story anyway. We had just bought a house, and we were undergoing a lot of stress with remodeling and moving. On top of that, both my wife and I were working a lot in our respective careers to try to make our way up the ladder. I work as a copywriter, and she is a journalist. She was very close with her boss and all the other employees at the paper she worked for. I know that she saw her boss as sort of a mentor for her when she started. He helped her master writing in her field, and he often gave her special stories to cover that fit her interests. I knew the man well also. He was a widower, and my wife had a lot of sympathy for him because she was worried about him being alone all the time. His children had moved out of the house, and he lived by himself. At first, I thought that the relationship was harmless. Years had gone by, and he was more of a father figure to her than anything else. Finding out that he was the person that she had been having an affair with was beyond shocking. I started to notice that things were off when she was spending more time in the office. Her job is easily one that she doesn't even have to go in for. She has a home office that she can work from whenever she wants to, but she chooses to go in because it helps her focus and she enjoys socializing with her coworkers. When she told me that she would have to be staying late, I questioned why she wouldn't just come home and work in the office. Certainly, that was better than staying in an office building by herself. She could have had dinner with her family and then went right to work. Having it happen one time would have been something to forget about, but when she was staying late in the office 2 or 3 times a week, I had some red flags waving. Normally, I wouldn't assume that she was cheating on me, but I had read a lot of Reddit posts and confessions from people who were being cheated on. I started to worry if maybe that was the case here. I honestly didn't even know where to begin with trying to find out if she was cheating on me. I decided that the best thing to do would be just to observe some of her habits and behaviors and see if everything was all in my head. The more I watched her, the more I realized there might have been something going on. Another thing that I noticed was how she would tilt her phone away from me when she looked at it. It was odd that wasn't something she had ever done before that I was aware of. If she wasn't trying to hide anything, I didn't understand why she would tilt it. I was starting to work myself up thinking that she was having an affair, so I decided to take the plunge and hire someone who could dig around. I found a local private investigator who took on the case. After I told him everything I was suspicious about, he decided that the best place to start would be at her work. He waited outside around the end of her workday to see if he could follow her and see where she was going. On the second day that he was working, I got a text message from my wife telling me that she would be staying late in the office. I immediately told the private investigator about that, so they would keep a close eye on her building to see where she went if she left. However, she didn't leave the office. When she eventually did, the private investigator followed her to our house. It seemed like she really was staying late at the office. I told the private investigator that I was clearly in the wrong for what I was doing, and I wanted to call them off. They ended up convincing me that there still could have been something going on in the office. I thought it was silly, but I told them that I would pay for another day just to rule that out, and then if they didn't find anything, I would terminate our contract. Sadly, they found something. My wife was yet again staying late in the office, and the private investigator found her in her boss's office performing oral on him. He got some pictures and videos of it for me. When he showed me, I was shocked and disturbed, and I felt like the world was falling out from under my feet. I had my suspicions, but I never wanted to confirm them. Part of me had been hoping that hiring the private investigator would just prove that my wife was faithful. Her boss was like a father figure to her, so I couldn't comprehend how they even started an affair. Regardless of my confusion, I was done with her. I had given her everything I possibly could, and she was throwing it back in my face. I felt a lot of pity for myself, but after wallowing in that for a while, I was angry. I wanted to show them that they couldn't both just treat me the way they did without there being consequences. There was a rival newspaper in the area that I remembered my wife always talking about. Her paper and the other were always trying to one-up each other. I had the perfect story for them. Before I sent an article to the rival magazine, I met with the HR manager of the newspaper my wife worked at. I told them about everything that happened and how they were having intimate in the office, showing them the evidence. It was a clear violation of their policy, and they assured me that they would both be dealt with. 2 days after I did that, my wife came home in tears, complaining about how she was fired. She didn't tell me what happened. She lied and said that she was laid off due to budget cuts. I was partially surprised that she continued with the lie, but at the same time, she had already lied so much. When I knew that she was fired, I sent an email to the newspaper. I got a response saying that they were going to cover the story, but they needed to put a spin on it to make it more marketable. Otherwise, it would have just looked like revenge porn. The story that they ran with was about a boss sleeping with his workers and getting them both fired. They put the picture I attached in, though they blurred the faces of my wife and her boss. Because my wife worked for the rival paper, we never had that one at home. However, that morning I made a special stop to go and grab the latest issue of the newspaper. I sat right at the kitchen table and opened it up in front of her while I drank my coffee. Right on the back of the paper was the article with a picture of her in her boss's office performing sexual acts on him. She nearly spit out her coffee when she saw it. She yanked it out of my hand and read the article while I sat there with my arms crossed in front of me. She didn't say anything, probably because she didn't think I realized what was on the paper. As she was reading it, I commented on how funny it was that the article mentioned a boss and an employee getting fired the very same day as she was. That clued her into my knowledge about her affair. She tried to explain herself and told me that it was a one-time thing, but I didn't believe her. She was mad that I had the article published. It's hindsight. I do feel like I went a little too far with that. We lived in a small town and everybody saw that article. It wouldn't have taken a lot of brain power to figure out who it was. We ended up getting a divorce. We had a prenup, so thankfully I didn't know her anything. We sold the house and split everything down the middle. It's just hard to believe that something like that happened. This would happen to me. I've been loyal and trustworthy throughout our entire marriage, and I never expected that. I know it's going to take a lot to move on from, but I'm hoping I can heal soon. Today's third story. In this story, after a 2-year marriage filled with love and happiness, a man was devastated when he discovered his wife was having an affair with her sister's husband. His suspicions grew over time, and after uncovering explicit messages, he exposed the affair to their families. The betrayal led to 2 divorces and a shattered family, leaving him determined never to marry again. Now let's get into the story. I, 32 male, was married to my ex-wife, 28 female, for 2 years. It still shocks me that after all the promises my ex-wife made to me, she stooped so low and cheated on me. My wife and I first met at my cousin's college graduation ceremony. She had also come to attend her brother's graduation, and we got along well. After the ceremony, she gave me her number at request, but it took me weeks for her to finally take my calls. After weeks of her not taking my calls, I coincidentally bumped into her one day, and she apologized for not taking my calls and offered that we should go to the movies together. Going to the movies was our first date, and from there, multiple dates followed, and we ended up marrying after a year of dating. In the beginning, marrying my wife brought me so much happiness. She ticked all my boxes, and everything was smooth between us. She was great in bed, a good cook, and she took good care of me. We were always so happy together, and I loved what we shared. While my wife worked as a data entry clerk, I worked as a heavy machine technician, and what we earned was enough to take care of us. Aside from being happy that I married my wife, I was also glad she had a great family. I grew up with my dad, and he raised me as a single parent, and the only cousin I had was my dad's younger sister's daughter. One of the things I always looked forward to was a family of love, and that's what my wife had. She had 2 brothers and 1 sister, plus her parents. Her family were so close to each other, and since we all lived in the same town, we used to hang out once every month as a family unit. Whenever we had a picnic, family dinner, or a gathering, all of my wife's siblings would come with their spouses, and this was how I got close to one of her brother-in-laws, my wife's sister's husband. We were around the same age, which allowed us to bond well. Most times, if my wife and her sister were hanging out, or going out of town for the of a mutual friend or an extended family member, her brother-in-law, and I would go out for a couple of drinks or watch football together. As time passed, He wasn't just my favorite brother-in-law, we became very good friends. Months after my wife and I clocked a year together, I noticed she was getting closer to her sister's husband. It's not like there was anything wrong with being close to her sister's husband, but I felt something was different with their relationship and some other changes followed. For example, if we went for a family dinner, my wife would talk to everybody except her brother-in-law, which was very unlike her. And if her brother-in-law and I were hanging out, and I mentioned my wife in our conversation, he would avoid the topic and chip in something else. Regarding their closeness, if we all went somewhere, maybe the park or shopping mall, my wife would prefer to hang with her sister and husband than with me. If we sat at a table to eat together, she would prefer to sit next to him and leave me alone wherever I was. I quietly watched her for months to ensure my head was not messing with me. Around the same time, I noticed all these changes. My wife's attitude towards me changed too. It got so bad that we could not converse without her mentioning her brother-in-law's name. Our intimacy dropped too, and she barely allowed me to touch her. Whenever I tried to, she complained about being tired or not being in the mood. Sometimes, she'd even say she was seeing her monthly flow even when I knew she wasn't. Before I suspected something was going on between her and her brother-in-law, my wife did not care about her looks whenever we wanted to hang out as a family unit. But she suddenly became so concerned. She'd wash and curl her hair in advance, pick out a dress that would expose her thighs and cleavages, and apply makeup. It became evident that she was trying to look good for a reason, and even her sister and other family members noticed the great difference. The whole time, I had been suspecting my wife. Deep down, I wanted to be wrong. But one night, after waiting for almost an hour, for her to stop chatting and blushing on her phone and spend time with me, she said she was tired as usual and slept off. I was so hurt by her actions and neglect that I went through her phone to see who had been making her blush like that. When I accessed her phone and went through her social media accounts, I stumbled on her messages on WhatsApp with her sister's husband. She saved his name as Bestie with 3 love emojis, and I suspected he was the one before I opened their conversation. I could not believe what I saw when I went through their conversation. Not only was my wife having an affair with her bail, as I suspected, but they had also exchanged nudes. Even that evening, he had sent her pictures of his private part and wrote a long erotic text of all the nasty things he would do to her when they met again. They planned to meet in a cheap motel in 2 days, and they kept recounting their last escapade together. I was so disappointed and didn't know how to feel. To even think that they were making jokes about her getting pregnant for him and keeping the child. I felt so betrayed. At that moment, I felt like stuffing her with a pillow. I had to control my anger because she wasn't worth getting a life sentence for. Shortly after I was done with my emotional meltdown, I had an idea to teach her a lesson. So I took screenshots of their conversation, especially the parts where he sent her his nudes and they mentioned meeting at the motel to have fun. Then I cleared all traces that I went through her chats. That night I couldn't sleep at home because I was hurt and kept crying like a baby. Even though I suspected something was fishy, I still could not believe my wife would break me like that after all our promises to each other. The following day, I went to work from the motel I spent the night at, and she kept calling me the whole morning to find out why I wasn't at home when she woke up. I cooked up a lie for her, and I told her I'd be home after work. When I got home that evening, she could tell something was wrong, but I told her I had a bad day at work. Meanwhile, the following day, she had planned to meet with my BIL at the motel. She didn't know I had called her sister and explained everything. She was more shocked than I was and promised she would not confront her husband. Also, I created a WhatsApp group chat, added all her close family members to it, and told them everything I found out. I dropped the screenshots I took there so everyone could see, and they couldn't believe it. Her sister kept doubting that my wife would do such a thing to her. After everyone was out of their shock phase, we all planned to go to the location of the motel they would be using so we could catch them in the act. On D-Day, which was a Saturday, I watched as my wife dressed her best, did her makeup, and lied to me on going to see one of her old-time friends who had just given birth. I acted all calm and watched her as she left. About 10 minutes after she left, I drove to the location and notified her family that she was on the move. Eventually, We all renders vows at the motel as planned and decided to go to her room. There were 5 of us, excluding her father. When we got to her room, I knocked and pretended to be room service, and she opened the door with a white towel wrapped around her chest. The moment she saw that I was the one, she froze. Then, we all entered the room one after the other. Her BIL was in the bathroom, and when he heard voices and came out to see us, he ran back into the bathroom and refused to come out. My sister-in-law was so heartbroken, and she attacked my wife. Right there, I told her to her face to not bother coming home and that she'd be hearing from my lawyer soon. Her mom and brothers could not even say anything to her. They all stood there in awe. I left the room and left them there so she could deal with her family. Immediately, I got home, threw her stuff out of my house, and contacted a lawyer to start processing our divorce papers. She tried to call me and beg a couple of times, and I told her she was insane to think I'd take back a shameless cheat like her. The worst was that she had no one to turn to. Her family disowned her, and her sister cut all ties with her because she couldn't handle the betrayal. I had to divorce her and officially get rid of her. Her sister also divorced her husband, and my wife had to move in with her friend Town. Later, I found out that their affair started under my roof, and they had it going long before I suspected something was happening. My wife claimed she continued the affair with her bail because he was not as boring as me. I guess she will have enough fun living with disappointed family members for the rest of her life. I'm fine now, but I've decided to not marry again. It's better to be alone, so I don't experience such disappointment and heartbreak again.